Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're staying safe and sane out there. In this episode of the Underwater Podcast, I'm talking to underwater cinematographer and camera operator Ian Takahashi, who's known for his work on the TV shows Pretty Little Liars, Masters of Sex, and Scandal, as well as the upcoming Suicide Squad movie and the fourth season of Stranger Things. We chat about how the industry is doing during the lockdowns, his career from a purely land-based operator into the underwater world, and some of the projects he's worked on, including one of my favourites, and you'll see which one that is. It gets a little technical in the interview, talking about gear and terminology, but don't let that put you off. There's some really great info in here, and we have a couple of laughs as well. All right, let's dive in. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brett, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Where are you at the moment? Are you holed up in this whole crazy COVID-19 malarkey?
Yes, but I am in Manila, the Philippines. Yeah, we kind of keep a place here. My wife's Filipino, her family's here, and I've been working a ton and just decided to take off. I didn't have a job starting. Like, the next job I wanted to take was like April or May. So we said, I flew back to Manila and we were hanging out here, and then they shut the city down and we're like, oh, well, I guess I'm here now.
Oh, so you got out before it all kicked off?
I got out of the States. I landed in Manila. Yeah. And then we were here hanging out, like playing golf and doing things. And then we were up in our condo here. And then they said, there's 50 cases. The whole city is locked down. Like, go to the grocery store, save some toilet paper for other people. And so we did. Like, I technically, I could have gotten out. We could all jumped on a flight and gone back to the States. But, we figured the risk of going to the airport with like thousands of people and getting on a cramped flight. And then we saw photos of like people heading back from Europe and everywhere, and, crammed in like, 5 hours and, no space. We're like, we'll stay here. It's fine.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Like, where people have been, you've got to weigh up a decision. Like, you're going to be stuck somewhere in a house or an apartment. Yeah. Where's the best place to do it?
Oh, yeah. Well, my good friend John he's from New York. His family is from Italy, and they're there. And he was shooting in Mumbai, India. And so he got 4 hours notice from their government that everything was locked down. And then he got like a message from the embassy, and they're like, in 4 hours, the country will be sealed off. He's like, what?
Oh my God.
And then he's like, do I run to the airport with like 1 million people to try to fly, but where? To New York City? Oh, no. Or go to my family in Italy? He's like, no. So he's in Mumbai still, hanging out.
So he's still staying there?
Yeah. We have another friend who lives there, like after school, like moved back to Mumbai. And then, but our other friend, John, he's still there hanging out. He's in a hotel. He seems in good spirits. His family's good and safe in Italy. That's all good. But yeah, he just had waited and was like, why run to the airport with 1 million people? Like, I don't have a flight. It's just, meh.
Yeah. But I do wonder how many people have gotten into that situation, especially with productions in the film industry, where, you might be living somewhere for 3 months anyway. How many people have been stuck abroad right now?
Yeah, I know. You hear about all the sweeper flights, like getting people off of islands, like people in like Madagascar and Panama and Nicaragua, and trying to get home. And I think it was like Panama. They had a flight, like a U.S. had a flight heading in, and then had to turn it around because like it didn't look good to land in land like a military plane into Panama or one of those countries, and like they had to work it out with the government. And I think that everyone's slowly being repatriated if they wanted to, like. Gonna be okay. Hang on your hotel. Although we do have local friends, my wife's friends that are here. Some of them were like at their beach houses when the capital shut down. Are like, oh, I guess I'm staying here. So they're just at their beach house, like scuba diving every day, barbecuing on the beach with. Yeah, they're there with a bunch of friends. Are like, well, I guess we're all sheltering in place here. So yeah, you FaceTime them and they're just partying on the beach.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of the thing. It's like, if it's going to be the end of the world, you kind of want to be with a whole bunch of other people, really.
Yeah.
People at least.
Especially like if you had just spent a week like in close quarters with them, we're like, well, I guess it's better just to stay together than to split up. And, if one of us had it, we already infected each other. So if we all go
Yeah.
home, then we just, spread it around. And if none of us had it, then we were better off just hanging out together.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I'm not a
And that,
doctor. Let's start off by saying I am not a doctor.
yeah, no. I'll put the disclaimer in the show notes for that
Ian
one.
is
Yeah.
not a doctor. This is very true.
Yeah, I was speaking to a photographer last week, and he's in the Bahamas, and him and I think 6 other friends are on 2 sailboats, just quarantining themselves out in the Bahamas somewhere.
That's awesome.
And
it wasn't Marcus, was it?
no, it was Andre Musgrove.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was lots of free diving with those guys, lots of spearfishing, I think.
I'm sure they're having a blast. I'm sure there's hardship being on a boat for so long, etc. But I mean, there are worse places to be.
Yeah, totally. So how do you think the industry's handling this? I mean, lots of shows have shut down. A lot of shows have even cancelled. How do you see it from your point of view?
Well, I would have to say that I think the safest way for everyone to come back is just to shoot everything underwater. I mean, socially distant. I'm not close to anyone when I'm underwater. I don't think the virus survives in chlorinated tank water. But, we just put up a green screen behind them. We just put in 1800s Paris or whatever production wants. That's my solution. Everything shoots underwater and, call it a day.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things about it's all temporary, like pre-vaccine, pre-actual herd immunity. I mean, there's so many things being discussed. Like, right now, like we don't really have like any real sick pay to really talk about. I think it's like 2 days, and sometimes it's at production discretion. So if there is enough quick testing where you tested on the way to work, or like when you got in line, you got to the stage and everyone had to take a test. Like, what if you were positive? Then it's like but then what? Like, how many people around you are now like quarantined and like kicked off? And then like, are you just unemployed? Or like, do you go on to production sick leave? Like, is there, how long does that go? Like for 2 weeks. And then if you get, if you're in line and the guy behind you coughs on you and you get sick, like, and you can't work, and then you go into the ICU, like, are you now on disability? Like, how long, there's all those things that need to be worked out, on top of just, how do you shoot with, on a stage with a ton of people? Is everyone wearing like gloves and masks? And then, how do you keep your talent safe? Because they can't wear masks. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not a doctor. I just, I hope that things can like slowly start coming back, of course, because I know so many people are out of work and need to work. I hope that it does. I mean, one thing I've been, it's kind of off topic, but one thing I've been pushing, and like keeps like sending emails and like writing up pitches and submitting it, to our own union is just about, providing financial education for our union. There's some really brilliant people there who are doing really well, not only in career-wise, but like living below their means and buying apartment buildings and investing it well and doing that. And then there's, plenty of people who are really living, paycheck to paycheck, which is really rough. You're like, but it's been 2 weeks. Like, I know some of these people, and they're paid well, but it's just this, spending habits and everything else. I mean, there's a whole other conversation, student debt, blah, blah, blah. But, that would just be a side. Like, once everyone's back to work, I think it's a matter of just saying, hey, look what happened. This is the fallout. Like, what can we do to make it better? Get people into a stronger position, for the future.
I think there's been a very sudden, sharp wake-up call for a lot of people, not just in this industry, but people in general, about planning for the future and for stuff that you don't even know that's going to happen, I mean, if you've been quarantined for 2 or 3 weeks and you're having trouble, paying rent or paying your mortgage, then you got to look at your own finances a little bit and work out, how did that go so wrong?
Yeah, exactly. We'll preface it with, everyone's in their own situation. Maybe you can't live in LA and put away like 6 months worth of emergency funds right away. Maybe you're really new to the industry. I mean, who knows? There's so many situations and everything needs to be taken care of. But I think a basic education in what can be done and what you can do to start taking care of your own future over time is, can be helpful into the future.
Yeah. So, well, let's get off that depressing topic.
Yeah,
And
something wet and fun.
exactly. Do you want to talk me through how did you get into underwater? Were you a dry side cinematographer before, and then excuse the pun, but fell into it, or was it something you'd always planned to do?
Well, I was in school like learning like cinematography, like a regular above dry cinematography, and I met an underwater DP operator, Mike Thomas. He came up. He was a guest speaker, and he showed us his work, which included, like Thin Red Line, Castaway, The Truman Show. Like he was John Toll. Like he shot a lot of second unit for John Toll. Was his operator from a bunch of big movies. Really, really great guy. And I just didn't even know that was a thing. Like that was a job. you know.
You didn't know that underwater cinematography was a job?
No, I had no idea. I mean, I was in college, and I'd seen movies. I knew that cameras were underwater, but I didn't know that was like a dude who did that, and that was like his career of like, oh, I'm the guy who shoots underwater. I didn't really look into it, but when I met Mike, it was like like eye opening. I was like, oh my god, that seems amazing, and it fit just with everything. Like I loved swimming, but I hated swimming fast or like competing or really doing anything. I just like being underwater and like looking at things, swimming around. Like I was always like poking grates in the bottom of the pool or like snorkeling and like grabbing rocks and stuff.
Were you a scuba diver as well?
Not at that point. I was just free diving whenever I got to the ocean. So when I met Mike, I talked to him, and he very, very gracefully allowed me to have his email address. And then I started pursuing it from there. I think I had like a year left in school. So I kept in touch with Mike, emailing him, asking him questions, and he was nice enough to reply when he could. I went out with a bunch of friends who I still work with today. We all went out and got certified in Monterey, California, 7 millimeters, 1 foot visibility, cold water.
Yeah.
We got certified there. And then like my final project at school was half underwater. I knew that if I moved, and when I got out into the real world, I really needed to have something, to show if I wanted to keep shooting underwater, because it was so, it's so expensive to do underwater shoots that it would be harder to get someone to take a chance on me, no matter how low budget, if I had nothing, to show.
Yeah.
So we got together and had this idea, and like the director and myself and producer and kind of the editor kind of chipped in some money, and we all kind of shot this thing underwater. And my wife from today, we were dating at the time. We drove to LA from San Francisco. We drove to LA, went to Hydroflex, like picked up the housing and lights and stuff, and drove it all the way back to San Francisco. We shot the whole weekend. My final project. And then I think on that Sunday my wife was in the water with the camera, like shooting some synchronized swimmers for something she wanted to do. And then that Monday we drove all the way back down to LA just to drop off everything.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So it was like a collaborative thing where you all just chipped in to kind of shoot the things that you wanted to shoot for your reels?
Yeah, basically. Like mine was like, I think it was like my quote, like thesis film. It was like a little commercial, like fake commercial. And my wife had to do another project that she was studying cinematography as well. And we're like, oh, well, we have this housing. And like our friend Phil Bowen, who was a teacher, I mean, he was a camera assistant from like Pearl Harbor and Star Wars and all this. But he had a hip replaced. And while that was healing, he was teaching. And, he was a big like water polo player and had friends who were synchronized swimmers. And so he got this thing together. We got into this big pool, synchronized swimmers, and my wife got to swim around and shoot all this great footage, all on 35 millimeter with one of these housings. And, the director wanted to do something like this, needed like a spec commercial for her reel. So, she put up some of the money. The same with the editor, like, we're like, if we're kind of stronger together, like everyone, like the Keys kind of put together some money, and we just went out and did it.
And so how did it turn out? Was it something that stands up today, or do you kind of look at it and go,
it definitely does not stand up today.
Right.
I mean, look, I'm proud of what we did for like the knowledge that we had, and the skill set and experience. And I still like the shots now. I think if we went back to the original negative and retransferred, I'd be a lot happier. But, I think we transferred it to like some sort of digital tape that wasn't very good. So like then, now, so that's kind of degraded. There's a couple shots I really liked from it, but, it was good enough that when I got to LA and, Mike got me an internship under John Toll where Mike was operating. So I got to spend a few months with John Toll and his whole team, which was incredible. And I ended up shooting another small movie as the cinematographer, which is crazy, but it's for that comedian Bobcat Goldthwait. So I shot that for him, and then that went off to Sundance. And I think the same day that like we got the word that we got into Sundance in '06, I got hired to do this like a LMU thesis film that was, I mean, it's pretty big. They spent like at least six figures on it. But then I shot the waterwork for that. So at least what I did was good enough to get hired, for another student film. And I think that's kind of how it went for the next decade. It was like, I did one job that year and like two underwater jobs the next year. And it just slowly built up. And then, as my contacts grew in their careers, our friend from school, Matthias, was off doing big music videos. And, he called me to do a Burger King commercial with him. So I got that. But really the change came when Mike retired. He was operating on Iron Man 3, and that was kind of it for him, and he retired. And I went down to his place and bought him coffee, and he told me to bring a truck, and I had a small car, but we still packed a bunch of gear into there. Like he was, he gave me some float rigs and some light meter housing, a bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah. So he kind of passed the gauntlet a bit, or
yeah, I mean, and more importantly than that, like the gear is great, and that float rig that he built it for Castaway. So when he's in the water with Tom Hanks in Castaway, he's got this, amazing float rig that's got like a fuel bladder with a dry hose inflator in it, so you can just fill that thing up and shoot to the surface, and a keel on it. So when you're in the waves, you start to lean to the right, and the keel goes up, and the weight brings you back down. I mean, it's amazing. And he built it, and that's that's in my storage unit to be shipped out whenever we go in the ocean.
Do you use this gear now?
Oh yeah. It's definitely like I have a much smaller, float rig that kind of goes in my cases when we're in like small pools and some tighter spaces. But when we're out there in the ocean and the waves, I bring his because it's simple, but it's a genius design and it works really well, and it makes the work better. But but more than the gear. He introduced me to Pete Romano at Hydroflex, who like I'd met and said hi to over the years, but Mike got me into the room with Pete and introduced me and recommended, and I sat down and talked with Pete for a while about like my work and where I come from, and showed him some stuff, and and then like a couple weeks later there was a job that Pete couldn't do. I forget why, but I got the call from him. It was a TV show, Pretty Little Liars. So then I went out and did the underwater work for that, and I didn't screw it up apparently, and he got a decent review back from them. And a little bit later I went out and did Scandal, and then Masters of Sex, and a Selena Gomez video, and that ended up winning like Best Pop Video 2013, I think. And that kind of got it kickstarted with like those kind of high profile, like at the time, like I don't there's not really much bigger than like Scandal was at that time, unless you go to like Game of Thrones, that kind of scale of TV. But but at the same time, I got and the next season Scandal came around, and I was on their call sheet from the last year, and I got a call to go back in and do Scandal again. And the first thing I did was call Pete, and I was like, hey, like Scandal called me again, but it's kind of your it's your client, like you passed it to me, I covered you, I don't want to take it, unless you are okay with it. And he was like, no, I love those guys, I want to go do it. And I'm like, great, it's all yours, 100%. So then then he went back, and it's just short-term thinking. Like I'm not gonna snag one job from him. How does how, like that's just not who I am, and I wouldn't want to do that. So
and I mean it's good to kind of keep those relationships solid as well, because everyone knows everyone, and
and just know that like if I go in and cover you on a job, like I'm not trying to steal your client. Like I'll do the job, I'll do a great job, but I know that I'm covering for you and the relationship you've built. Like that's fine. And then that's really kind of started. So then it's been just those years of just continuing to do those TV shows and commercials, and I guess like name and work gets out there more, so it kind of builds up and builds up and builds up, and it's been pretty good lately. So
I've been watching your work maybe for the last 2 or 3 years, I think, since I got into the cinematography side of underwater. And just seeing you go from these different projects to kind of bigger and better things each time, and more, I guess, more technical and more complicated stuff as well.
I think you and I had lunch one day, right? It was in like Silver Lake or somewhere. Was that the time that my truck died? Like I parked it, and then it just died.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you had to get the AAA or something out
Yeah,
to
yeah, like
jump your truck.
worst like lunch meeting ever. Like, hey, it's nice to meet
Yeah,
you. My truck's dead. I'm gonna go take
yeah,
care of
that's right. Well, it's not like you had a deadline or
it.
anything,
No,
so
no,
it
no.
was good.
Yeah.
So, where did you go from there? Are there things that you've done over that time that have kind of stuck with you and have kind of shaped or informed the way you work in the future? Are there things that have made you evolve?
Yes, I think that when I was starting off in my career, shooting underwater, it started off with just like getting the basics of like an exposure. Because when I started shooting everything on film, so I had underwater light meters and just figuring out, making sure that I got decent exposures
Hmm.
underwater and like basic operating. Like, yes, they're in the frame, thank God. And then to that, and then when I was starting to do that, I was like comfortable with that. Then it moved on to, well, I'm never gonna move up in my career and get to different and like bigger projects, and move out of the, hey, we've got $50 for this budget. Move out of that world.
Yeah.
If I just play it safe, and it's like, hey, there's an exposure in there, they're in the frame. So then I just started pushing the envelope all the time. I was like, look, this is low budget stuff, and I respect that, we want to do a good job, but I'm going to take risks and I'm going to push it so that, instead of it looking like the $50 budget, it looks like we had like $100.
Yeah.
And not just about like the money and budget, but I'm using that to kind of show what, push like the production value of it. So it doesn't look like, oh, that was super cheap in this dude's backyard. What can we do to make it look, so much better and like more than what it is?
And what would you do? What were the techniques that you were using to kind of push those budgets?
Oh, I mean, like, you see so much where it's like you just black out a pool and it's just black, but then when we started taking, like if it's supposed to be in a lake, we would take like a log and like just stick a log into the water, and have it like underexposed in the background just to give some sort of texture. So it kind of feels like it's in
Right.
a lake or somewhere, instead of just, hey, there's a black background and there's like one big backlight and then bam, hey, look at that. We
Yeah.
would take, I was at home. My wife was not happy about it, but over the stove, like I was taking strips of Lexan and like heating it on the stove with pliers and like pulling it apart, because when you heat it, it kind of softens and you can pull it, and then you move it away from the heat and it'll kind of dry, and then now you get these like slight little warped lines, and I was like then like taping that in front of the lens, or just adding additives to the water to give it like a little bit milkier look and bring the shafts of light in a little bit more. Just
Yeah.
like those little techniques that really don't cost much. Like it's work and it's thinking, but it's not really like a budgetary strain on trying to get or or even things like we couldn't afford like big lights. So we put up like a mirror on a stand and then shoot a bunch of little lights into it at different angles, and it would hit the mirror and then bounce back into the water at all these different angles, and it would look like we had like 4 lights up there, or like it would look like it was this big spread from a much larger source, because we could afford like 4 4 Licos. We couldn't afford one 4K. So those little things in the beginning of just like, this is the look I want to achieve. How do I do that with like a rubber band and some peanut butter? And sometimes most of the time it worked, or at least we got like most of the way there. And then as the progression went, and I went out on like Scandal and those, it kind of went back to the playing it safe. So like, oh my God, suddenly like I'm at like this network, level. There's a lot more pressure, like I'm covering for Pete Romano, like just do your job. Like just focus, do what like the DPs suddenly start having like ASC at the end of their name. And you're like, let's listen to him, do what he wants. Like, I'm happy to be here. Let me just
Yeah,
prove
right.
that I can operate and like work at this level. And
But
then
I guess you're working with a bigger budget as well, so then you don't have to be as kind of shoestring innovative as you were before.
oh no, definitely, because I mean, if you needed like 18Ks, then you have them. Or
Yeah.
then you're negotiating about like, well, does it need to be on a Condor? Like, do you need like one of the little remote head things the lights go on? Like, those are the kinds of things you're talking. Like, is it better to have like an electrician in the basket, or is it better to have the little remote thing that holds it? Those are like more of the
Yeah.
conversations that I end up having now. Whereas before it was like, I would like an 18K, and I just get laughed at.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But then as a progression, like then when I felt comfortable, like I can show up and I can do the job and I can operate, and everyone seems happy. Then it was trying to bring a little bit more of like myself to it, and trying to push it, and try to make things, try to add like basically like value added. Like if I show up, to the job, like I bring this, and not just pointing the camera. bring
Yeah.
extra to it. And it's also like the politics of it. Like when I went on again on Scandal, and it was Darren Okada AFC, and we would discuss. He would talk to me about things, and when I felt it was right, I would suggest things just to him as like an idea, and let him decide if that was a good idea or if that was just not appropriate. And and he's the DP. Like it was up to him, and I would only suggest things to him when it was appropriate, and let him decide. And and then sometimes there's other DPs who you've worked with before who are relying on you a lot more. They're like, oh no, we want Ian to come out here, you handle it. I'm like, okay. So then I just kind of keep them informed about what we're doing, and what I would like to do and what the results should be, and make sure everything is still cool with him. But it's just kind of playing that game, that game of what the DP is looking for out of you, and then being able to when I have more freedom, then really pushing it. And like really, I had a conversation with, I think it was Joe Wright. I was on the phone. It was for this. Ford was paying for like an installation for like the 9/11 memorial, and they were off shooting something, and I was like doing the underwater work, and it was a very short conversation. I was told to make it look magical, and that was it. So I was like, okay, that was my direction. Okay, great. So then that was just everything. I was like, okay, like gloves are off. Like let's make it look amazing and magical, and just go do that. Which is very broad strokes, but it wasn't. It wasn't very micromanaged. I didn't get all these photos of like, make it look like this contrast and this color. I was told not to roll it until the water was Ford blue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What color is that?
It's very
Pantone color.
Very, very blue.
Yeah, right. So do you enjoy that kind of problem solving? Like, is that part of the joy for you? Is them going, we kind of want this, we don't know how to make it, but we trust you to kind of sort it out?
No, I love it. I mean, if I can solve those problems for people, I mean, I think that's, I would say that that's one of the reasons why I've had, such like success and progression in my career, is I really enjoy, those kind of problem solvings. I mean, like, sure, like later, at the bar with my key grip, we might be like, whoa, that was crazy. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
But, at the time we're like, what do they mean? Like Ford blue? Like, I don't, okay. Like, how do we do that with what we have and like fast?
Yeah.
I remember we were doing the show, The Last Ship. Peter Weller was directing, and it was a complicated shot. We had these underwater mines, and I'm like swimming backwards through mines and cables, tracking these like Navy SEALs or whatever they were.
Yeah.
And very specific points of like, it's a 3-shot here, you track back, it ends up in a single, turns into a profile, track with him, arc around him to reveal the mine. He swims up to it, you go around to the other side, land in a close up, and hold there for dialogue, because he's like talking through his mast to the top side, and we'd do it. And I'd had it coordinated with like my electrician's in the water with lights like coming up. So when we land on his close up, he's got like a nice eye light and it's pretty, I've got safety divers in places. And, we did the first take and come up, and then, just, everything changes, and like, do this here and do that there and change this moment. Okay, go, let's roll it. And we're like, whoa, I've got like 30 seconds to like give different people directions and then go do it and be right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I love that adrenaline rush. I love when we're doing all the crazy, like, shooting cars off into the water at me, or, we were doing, I mean, on this last, like the Suicide Squad, I guess 2, I can't say what we were doing, but like I was in a full body harness with like giant water dumps. And just trying to like, the camera was like harnessed to my harness, and then I'm harnessed into a wall to like stunt guys, who they're holding onto me, but then releasing me at given points so that I like, it was just,
wow,
it was awesome.
Yeah.
But it was like 4 days and my body hurt at the end of every day, but it was so much fun.
Well, that's like turning camera operating into like an extreme sport kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I wasn't wearing air tanks or anything. It was just me. I had a bunch of weights on just to try to keep my feet on the ground, which was pretty unsuccessful. But yeah, it was, sometimes you're down there being tumbled and like holding your breath, trying to hold onto a camera, and then getting your feet underneath you, coming up and hoping you land in that close up that you owe.
Yeah.
With like James Gunn and everybody like at the monitors watching. And, like,
yeah.
And then like other camera operators like Chris McGuire and Tom Lappin, who are just incredible. And you're just like waving, like, "Hi guys, I'm happy to be here." I mean, they're amazing and great too. But it's just it's just so much fun to try to do that, and the fact that we did get it, and we didn't have to do like 10 takes. We just went through and got it. Everyone was happy. We went home. I was like, okay, I think that's what we should be doing.
Do you find that if you're working with a director or a DP who hasn't done a lot of underwater work, do you find that there's like a certain amount of education from your end to them to kind of let them know how things are going to go and how hard it is to get in certain shots? Like, is there like kind of feedback from your end?
There can be if they're receptive to it. Sometimes they're much more rarely. Sometimes they're just like, no, 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 go do it. And you're like, but I can't. Okay, like it's just physics. Like I can't do that.
Right.
What you want?
Yeah.
I know there was I won't name names or the show, but they wouldn't return calls or emails, and of me asking like what we're doing and like what gear we're using, because usually they let me know and then I kind of pick what gear they like. Oh, we want to shoot this format, we want these lenses, and then I'll kind of put a package together. And this one was not like they picked everything. They didn't tell me what we were going to do, and I got out there and what they wanted me to do was just not possible with the gear that we had. Like the speed that it would take, it was a big housing and camera, and it was on the float rig, and they wanted me to dunk it and go like diving down. Like, but it's like we had fire in the water. Like it was 40 degrees outside, and like we had propane pumping from the bottom, and everything was on fire. And there's a crashed plane and boats swimming around, like driving around everywhere. Like I couldn't. It was 19 feet deep. I couldn't put ladders down. If they let me get the smaller housing, I could have used less air in the float and kind of held it up, and then easily dumped it and gone. But because of the size of it, I had so much air, I just had no way to dump it fast enough. And it was just, then they got all mad at me and like, oh, okay, like I guess be mad at me. That's fine. Like I tried to get the information. I tried to do the best job I could. And if you're just going to blame me, that's fine. Like, do you want me to be here tomorrow? Like, I'm happy to not come back.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess you get to a point where you have to call it, right? You have to kind of walk away because you can't give them what they want.
Yeah. I think there's just a point of where I let them know, like, look, we can do this, and I need this, or like, we cannot do this with what we have. Like, if we could change to this, then we could do it. And I hate getting there, and we rarely get there. Usually it's like if you want that, like, but I need these things to get there, and then if they're unreceptive to it and just, no, you should be prepared. I'm like, you should return emails when I ask you what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a certain point where you're like, whatever, like I can't do anymore. Like, I'm not going to argue with them. Like, fine. You can blame me. Like I'm working next week on another job, I know I didn't screw up.
Yeah. Do you have a team of people that you work with, like with your electrician and with your grips and stuff? Is there people that you got who are your go-to?
Oh yeah. I've got a very, very short list of from like the camera assistant side, water techs to like my underwater like key grip. And, usually like when he's available, Soda Pop will come out, or Leonard and Andy doing like the underwater electrician side, underwater gaffer side of it. Because I mean, it is a specialty, and like I've seen too many dudes who are like, oh yeah, I do underwater electrician, and then they float to the surface, and then you hand them a like a light stand or a sandbag, and it just takes them to the bottom because they haven't overinflated their BC, or they've done the opposite of where they're swimming a stand to the bottom, and they're buoyant for this light stand or like 2 shot bags, and then they drop them on the floor and they just shoot to the surface because they're now overinflated. Like just those basic things are like rampant, with people that I don't know. So that's why I've found people that I've met who are amazing at what they do, and they have a great team, and I'll do everything I can to try to make sure that they're taken care of and that they're on a job. And especially if I'm doing something that's got like that I want to do that's lower budget, it's explaining like the danger side of it, and yes, we can get guys for cheaper, but do you want them?
Yeah.
We have a limited time, we've got limited time, we've got a limited budget, we've got high hopes. Like, let's just spend an extra $200, per electrician in the water, and then we have a shot at getting what we want. And usually they're receptive to when you explain things, in a way that is understood, and not just that's their normal rate. Be like, we understand the situation, but these are the guys that we can get, and blah 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 blah. And sometimes the money is just not there, and so you have to, sometimes you go with guys who have maybe a little bit less experience, but are still safe, and you cross your fingers. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you've got guys throwing spearfishing fins on when you're in a tank. You're like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? No, just get out. Just get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to maneuver properly. You need the shorter fins.
I mean, that and just kicking up silt off the bottom. I mean, there's so many things that, like, little details you have to take into consideration. That, like, when I call, when I call Soda Pop, like, he understands, and his guys understand, and they know what we're getting into, and they're like, look, we're gonna lay this blacks down, and then we're gonna do all this. We're gonna cut holes. We're gonna do this, and then we're gonna let it settle, and then we're gonna vacuum. Like, okay, and then we've done that. Like, we blacked out an entire aquatic center up in Hayward for the Steph Curry job, and we made sure we had 24 hours before we had to shoot, and we blacked it out. We got on the water to look at. We were doing some pre-lighting, and the notes I got back from the agency was it looks murky, and they weren't really excited about it. And like, yes, please, just, I completely understand. That's why we asked for this day. When we showed up the next day, crystal clear. Soda had cut holes in the 20 by 20 black that were on the bottom, and then put these like half-size milk crates on top, covered the top in black. And that way, when I'm looking at it with the camera, it just looks solid black, but it lets the filters still work. So everything is still...
Yeah. You still get that suction, the filtration through. And
so the whole tank filtered for 24 hours. So when we came back, it was already pre-lit. I got in there, and image came up on the screen, and the agency was happy and loved it. So.
I think coming from the outside of the cinematography world and even the photography world, seeing people come into this industry who probably really good at their jobs on the dry side, but want to get into the underwater world, and so they think it's kind of it's maybe a little bit harder, but it's still the same. But they forget that you have to know how to just be underwater first.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't know how to be an underwater person, it's kind of hard to do all the stuff you're saying, like, dropping light stands down there or pushing a camera through the water if your buoyancy is all wrong.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's from, I won't tell you which movie, but it'll be pretty high profile. I had to swim in a circle around this, A-list actress holding a full body shot. And, the way that everything was positioned, like, now there's a ton of just like these like 16-foot flags and all kind of stuff that had to be there that were now, so close to my camera. So I'm changing. Oh, and she's kind of floating. She's all harnessed in, but depending on her breath, she's kind of floating around. And so I have to figure out my buoyancy based on how much air I have in my lungs, like let it out to sink down with her, and then like take some in to float up with her. And so I'm just on, but I don't have my BC on. I just have like a 25-foot hookah line, swimming, pushing the camera, sideways through the water, looking at the monitor, looking at her. And I have like an inch of clearance on the back of the housing, on these obstacles. So, pushing it, trying to swim in a straight line in a perfect arc around her, keeping her framed, using my breath to go up and down in the water to keep the same level with her, and then making sure that she's correctly framed and not slamming the housing into stands and flags and lights and everything. And then, we did 2 takes of that. And they're like, yeah, no, we're happy, we're moving on. And it's like, I think is doing difficult shots, not making it seem difficult. And so that the director and everyone else is like, oh yeah, great, moving on. Okay, good, we got it. Because I never want them to know how hard things are for us. We just want to show up, do our job, get it done, make it look great, and move forward. If we can get through our day and get everything and get everyone happy and and great, then and we do that sooner than later, then that's awesome. I don't want to do 5 takes to make sure it's perfect. Like, I want to get it, ideally take 1, but yeah, when's that going to happen? I get it by take 2.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get it take 1, but then I'm like, no, you know what? I think I can do a little better. Let's try it again. And sometimes I'm like, no. Take 2 was far worse. Take 1 was great.
Right. Okay. So how do you go, like, working with celebrities and stuff underwater as well then? So if you've got these A-list actors who are probably, they've signed up for this movie or this TV show and they've might have mentioned that there's an underwater scene, but they've never really done it before. What do you see from your side? Well, I'm assuming you're not really interacting too much with them beforehand.
No, we've got a great team. again, it's such a small world. There's a couple like Marine coordinators, like water safety, guys out there like Will Hall and Mike Nypris and Matt O'Connor, and Katie, and there's some really good people who, when I have my initial conversations with productions now, I usually mention like, how comfortable is talent in the water, and is there time in the schedule to get them into the water for a few hours at least, if not a day, with our water team, and that way that kind of builds that rapport. And I've never had an issue with talent, in the water. There's one, I'm not dealing directly. A lot of that is on the water safety team. They're all like SAG and stunts, and some of them are local 80 as well. So they know that world, and they're there with the talent, like helping swimming them out, making sure they're safe, giving them their air, doing all of that. And and honestly, like someone like Beyonce, who's so hardworking, and she was so like nice and accommodating and friendly and wonderful in the water. I mean, it was my team, keeping her alive, in this water tank when she would go down to the bed. They would tuck her in and do everything, and she knew the moment that the air was out of her mouth, she could just stick her hand out, and it would be right, in a split second, it would be right there, for her, like regardless of the shot or anything. It's like, whatever, destroy the take, get Beyonce her air. Like there's no question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always been, sometimes they're a little bit nervous about things, like when we're doing like some different stunts and they don't, like I've been in cars, sinking cars with, with actors, and that, because they don't have air, and like this, sometimes it's hard to put, show them exactly where safety is, but we're always very conscious and like, no, like, Freeze, who's your safety diver, he's here in the back seat, he's on air, he's got your air, like I've got safety here, this is what we're doing, very calm and controlled. And so far, knock on wood, of course, so far everything has been good. We have had a couple things with some doubles who have said that they can swim, and you kind of question it after a minute, but
Right.
but that's the same as above water when they're like, oh yeah, I can ride a horse, and you're like, do you know what a horse is? Because you cannot ride that.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure what this is right now, but it's not riding a horse.
Yeah.
Have you had anyone kind of just bail on a production because they couldn't do that shot? I mean, not on the production, but to have not been able to do the shot they've been asked to do.
I wouldn't say like bail on it overall. Like I know we've had some things that have been difficult, and we've kind of modified it to make it doable, because they brought up their concerns, or like, I just can't do this part here. Some of it's really difficult. Yeah. Like I know that like floating on your back, with your face looking up and like head up, and the water goes straight up your nose, and some people, without training, like it's so difficult to ask someone to be able to do that. Those kind of things, we're like, no, that is really difficult. What can we do? And work with the director, and like, how can we shoot this scene to eliminate that section, or like, how can we do, so I know we've had some where, they were, supposed to be like, tied to a chair or something, like the bottom of the pool, and down at like the 12-foot deep, the pressure on them, the water pressure was kind of getting to them, and they're feeling really claustrophobic, and they're like tied into this chair. And even if we have, like the captain of the local police department dive team is like right next to him, it's still freaky. Yeah. So instead of shooting it there, we modified the shot, and we shot it over in the 4-foot deep section. So they didn't feel the water pressure, and they knew they could just stand up and head above water, and okay, good.
Yeah, but and you can just frame up the shot so it works.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, it was harder for me. Like we brought like the dolly over and had like bungees attached to that, because I had to lift most of the camera out of the water just to keep the dome just underwater, and it became more of a thing for us. But whatever, like we're there to get the shot. If that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do.
Yeah. There was one production that I wanted to talk to you specifically about, which is the Harry Styles music video that came out like a month ago. Yeah. And it's pretty dear to my heart, because you're sinking an entire room into this tank, which is something that I like to do myself. Yeah. Can you talk us through that? Like, I'd love to hear how that sort of came about, and what was used to kind of get that room to it looks like it's filling up, but it's actually sinking, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The DP for that, Scott Cunningham, he and I had worked together on like a Missy Elliott video, where I think they did green screen in Atlanta, and then Scott and I did underwater background plates in LA, and then they were comped together. And I'd helped him through some other things over time, and not available sometimes, but just kept in touch. And he hit me up about this, and he was like, this needs to be really special. Like, we love this song. Like, Harry's amazing. We need to do it. And so I said, yeah, of course. I mean, honestly, I didn't know who he was, Harry Styles. So I was like out of the country, and I was like, am I going to fly back for this? Like, I love Scott. Like, what's going on? And my wife and my agent were like, where are you from? Like, Harry Styles is massive. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is going to be awesome. Like, you love Scott. Like, it's going to be great. We're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's fine. Like, sometimes I just get caught up in like the 4 productions I'm prepping where something else comes up, and I'm like, oh no, that is awesome. And it's all these people that I like. So what am I doing?
Right.
I run things by my wife to make sure that I'm not being crazy.
Yeah. You need that reality check sometimes. I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So anyways, I started working with Scott on that. And, it was a conversation from the beginning, especially with the producers, about how to achieve that. And, obviously we can't pump water into a room, like that's just what do we rent a stage and build a set and then fill? I mean, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then we've done this, this kind of like how it's kind of done all the time is you build the set, and we hung it from a crane and then sank it, just lowered it into the water. And since, unfortunately, Tank 1 closed in Signal Hill, California. That was ruled out. There's another tank that we really like shooting at up in Acton at Rob's place. The set was too large and tall to do it really, to do it, plus all the lighting we had to do. So we ended up having to rent Falls Lake at Universal, which was way too big for what we needed, but the water was warm, it was crystal clear, and there was the opening section was all done on dry land during the day. So if you ever see pictures of behind the scenes, if they ever release it, there's the set is draped in black, with the whole techno crane underneath it. It's just big black tent with a champion crane ready to grab it. And then once we finished those sequences, and we started the water pumping out of the piano, we did that dry, down to like a couple inches. And then after that, we let it become night as they hooked it up, and we rotated the whole set and, made it so all we did was spin the crane 180, and now we're out over the water. And I was operating B camera dry, just handheld, and then got in the water with the Hydroflex housing and everything to operate that camera. And I talked, we're talking to Scott, we're like, no, we should have 2 housings. One goes on the crane and one goes in my hands. That way there's 2 lenses on it at all times. Like, you can be looking down on him, skimming through the water, like be above water and push down. And like, oh, no, that's great. Just those little things I like to throw, maybe people don't know or whatever, just, they're thinking about, 5 million other things that just kind of bringing those things up really, can help. Because Scott was like, oh yeah, no, why? Yeah, that's a great idea. Like, yeah, we should be doing that. So then we had 2 cameras on him. And one thing that no one really thinks about until they're there doing it is that when you're syncing a set, we had 3 walls up. So one wall is missing and it's just water rushing in,
Right. Yeah.
So trying to hold a frame in the water when, it's just a wall of water pushing you towards Harry, which is great when you want to do like a push in to a close up. You just kind of lift your feet and go with the water. Yeah. But we had like crates of sandbags and things like into the, anchored into the ground for me to, sit on the floor with my feet against, just so that I didn't get washed away. The techno crane's fine, but you're in there. Like, my whole team is in there, like holding on to things because, you're sinking this. It's just gallons of water rushing through there, and you can't fight it on your own. You have to be anchored into something.
And how many times did they sink? Was it just one sinking, or would they pull it back up again and restart?
Oh no, we did it for like 4 hours at least, just up and down, up and down, up and down. And I mean, and Harry was great. He was so, the one thing that he asked for was that, we don't raise the setup out of the water until we're ready to shoot, which is reasonable because the water's nice and warm and it was really cold.
Oh yeah, right.
So we would raise the set and then everyone would be talking to him and he's just like freezing, out of the water and wet. We try to get him a dive cone. And then he was like, why don't we just leave it in the water? We can come out, roll the cameras, bring the set up, and then dunk it again. He's like, I'm fine for a minute. Like, I'm not going to have this conversation does not need to happen while I'm freezing. Very reasonable request. Great idea.
Yeah.
And so we did, we started doing that and everything went great. he was amazing. And I think the comments I see so much, online and for other people was like, oh, how did you get rid of the bubbles from his mouth and all that? But honestly, there wasn't really any to speak of. He was singing and he got all his hair out, and then he would go underwater and he just kept mouthing it, and he would just continue to sing underwater. And it's like a super professional, just watching him do that, and like he's just singing and concentrated like nothing else is going on. And he was incredible.
Yeah, because there's one scene, I think, in that, or one shot in that video clip where it's from above and you kind of see him and that fight all just gets sucked under the water.
Yeah.
And he's mid-song.
Yeah.
And he's singing and his eyes are open the entire time. And I think I commented to you, I was like, that must have taken a few takes. And you're like,
no, one straight away. And like that camera's there, and then I'm sitting there in a profile shot of him, just one. I think they cut to it right after, and it's just same. He's just sitting there, looking like nothing else is going on. And one thing we did have about lighting is we went all mainly LEDs, and then bigger sources were tungsten, so that we could control, the exposure when we went underwater, because obviously underwater, a lot of light's going to reflect off, and that way we could control it. So when we were going underwater, you could control how much light was bouncing around. But you can definitely see from the above water has more contrast than the below water, mainly just because of the way that light, kind of bounces around, and there is particulate matter in there, regardless if you see it or not, so it does kind of fill in the shadows a bit more. So we were, went with Scott, lighting it. Everyone was very conscious of, creating the contrast above water that he liked, but then being able to control the amount that was, underwater. So behind us on the open side was gray cement, a bunch of backlights. So that was, bouncing around. So, one of the first things we did was just, kind of black out the cement where we didn't want bounce to come from, just another step of, especially behind that window in the back, like we'd black that out, anything to control the amount of bounce. And we'll do that a lot in pools too, where, if we're blacking out like the back wall and sides, we may black off like half of the pool in front of us, but leave half open for that bounce to kind of come through. Just because I think it's prettier to have like a large, soft, controlled bounce source than, black out everything and then like put an LED up and shine it. Like I don't think there should be any shadows on their, any harsh shadows on their face or anything, especially underwater. Like, unless we have a car or like some sort of magic submarine under there, like there's no light sources, so where are these harsh shadows coming from? I mean, in your work, you're in those rooms, you sometimes have like TVs and, like lights and stuff on in there. So you can justify, a little bit more like, those shadows and that kind of cool stuff. But, if they're,
it can motivate it a bit.
Yeah. Like we're doing another job where people, let's say they're diving like into the ocean or into the lake at night, you still need to see their face, but there's no lights, and the only light is like above you. It's like, where does that come from? How does that look? Like, how does it not look terrible? What can you do to, have light on people's faces, make them look pretty in a space where there should be no light at all?
So that's when you're diffusing something from below. So
that's when we're putting up like, we're doing like 10 by 20, ultra bounces and, softly bouncing lights into there, setting up like 20 by 20 book lights just to have like a very soft source from the side, so they're not front lit, but there's some light on their face. And, sometimes you just kind of let it go dark. If they're, if they're falling backwards and it's just silhouetted, then fine. But, if they're swimming down, searching for something, you got to have, you got to be able to see them. So,
you got to have the detail in there to pull it out. Yeah.
It's like, you read a script and it says, Jimmy is in a pitch black room, reading a book. You're like, what? Wait, what? What is that?
Yeah.
Like, walk me through this again. He's in a pitch black room reading a book. How do you want to see that? Like, oh, well, there should be lights on. Can I just scratch off the part where it says pitch black? Yeah.
No. It's a poetic pitch black.
Yeah, exactly. It's photographable black.
Yeah. So when you're pitching for these jobs, or if you've already got them and you say you're the DP, are you getting influences from other places? Like, are you getting screenshots or, kind of reference material to influence the types of shots you're going to get?
Oh, yeah, always. I used to have binders full of, images like ripped from magazines and places. And I mean, now like my laptop has folders full of just images, or sometimes, if I'm not really, inspired, I guess, like I'll just go on to like Google and type in like cool underwater, and than not see anything I like and go to like artsy underwater and not see anything I, just, go through all of Google until I start seeing something that I like. And then kind of looking at that and thinking about like why I like it, why I think it works. And that's when I'm really stuck, or like I'm not, really inspired. And there's plenty of artists that I like looking at their work, and it doesn't even have to be underwater. Like I'll pull from like Irving Penn, I love as a photographer, so I'll try to go back to his work, or just everywhere really until I see something that I like. And a lot of times if I'm the underwater DP and I'm working with like a director, and the above water DP, I'll talk to them about what their references are, and because I don't want our work to be like a departure from the rest of the film. I mean, we have license to do that a little bit. Like when you go underwater, you have a lot more freedom to be, a little bit different visually because it is like this other world. But I don't want it to feel like, now we're in another movie. So we'll definitely sit down and like talk to director and DP about what they want and what they're looking for. And, I mean, much more importantly, if I'm off shooting it like on my own as a separate unit, I'll make sure that we have that. Sometimes, again, it's working with the above water DP. Sometimes they want to have like complete control over the lighting and everything, which is fine. And then they're just relying on you for like the support on how to get it done. Like, oh, I really love using book lights and I want a big soft source. Then you're like, oh, well, we could do this. And like, I've done this before. And, my guys can get this gear and we can set it up like this, and then working with him on that. And sometimes they're like, I like this image and I want it to look like this. And then I'll take it and run with it from there, taking his vision and making it happen. But, underwater.
Yeah. And what's coming up for you? Have you got, once we get out of this whole quarantine thing, are you going back onto projects? Have you got stuff kind of lined up that you...
Theoretically, I would. I think I'm talking to a director, friend Zach, about going and doing a movie, with him. We're not sure where, wherever opens up first, they're looking all over the world and places that fit. But if the US, opens up in a safe way, then, I think they're looking to shoot there. Canada, they like the idea of what Canada's doing, so they're looking there. They're also looking like in, Eastern Europe and some other places. And otherwise, I was in the middle of prepping for from 2 other jobs that were pretty high profile ones, that we were building like multiple sets, and then, building the set on a floor and then building a water tank around it, pretty big like heist job. That was going to be in New York, and another, really fun one in Atlanta, which would have taken me through August, May, June, July, August. Yeah, taking me through August, but fingers crossed, who knows what we'll get up to. And, hopefully those scenes have not been scratched off, but otherwise I'm literally looking forward to, we wrapped the Suicide Squad like right before everything got crazy, so hopefully they're, deep into post by now. And, I shot second unit for Ron Howard's new movie, and then 2 days in the water as well. But we wrapped that. I think the reshoots even wrapped before, everything got crazy. So I'm really looking forward to those 2 films coming out at some point. And at this point, like, hopefully it's in theaters as planned, but,
That's right. I think there's a lot going straight to video on demand at the moment. But
oh, yeah. Especially the ones that we're about to release. They're now like $20 to rent, which, fine. Like, I would have spent more just going by myself to the movie.
Yeah, once you get a hot dog and a Coke and stuff, it adds
true.
up.
I can make a hot dog at home, I guess. Not the same thing.
Exactly. No, it's never the same. Hey, Ian, thanks so much.
Oh, yeah. No, my pleasure, Brett.
It's been good to have a chat with you and kind of catch up. It's been a couple of years, I think, since we've kind of caught up. So it's nice to kind of get into some detail about it all.
Absolutely. Anytime. I look forward to seeing more of your work up on Instagram and Facebook or wherever.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the moment there might be a lot of self-portraits coming out and maybe still life.
Hey, that's fine. You in a bathtub shooting self-portraits?
Yeah. I don't think anyone needs to see that.
No. It's your private, your future coffee table book.
That's the, what do you call it? The Platinum Collection.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Ian. Take care, man, and we'll speak to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you'd like the podcast, please subscribe. If you'd like to connect with us, you can hit our website at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram or Facebook. Also, check out our regular live streams on YouTube. Links will be in the show notes. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.